The Four Agreements, October 24th, 2023. Philosophy and Yoga Commentary and Philosophical Correlation to Yoga Image Credit. Copyright 1997 Miguel Angel Ruiz, MD1. Be impeccable with your word. It's very important to be true to your word. Few adhere to it these days. Values are eroding like chalk on a rain-parched sidewalk. We are not benefited as a society from eroding values nor eroding behavior. Flaking, ghosting, and cancel culture has become far too common. My response to this is to put even more emphasis on being impeccable, not just with my word, but also thoughts and actions. This is the essence of yoga regarding Samkhya philosophy. In my opinion, this sentiment has its root in the yamas and niyamas. Essentially, they are the equivalent of the 10 Commandments, what to do and what not to do. In the case of the former, there are more than 10 things to observe in the practice of moral behavior. Both of those codes of conduct are quite old. They are not irrelevant but also not perfectly contemporary. Still, it's useful to have some sort of foundation. Don Miguel Ruiz suggests avoiding gossip. I wholeheartedly agree. It is very difficult. However, who do you know that never participates in gossip? I am guilty on that one. It's not impossible, however, and is certainly worth keeping in mind. It's akin to telling people they shouldn't judge. Are you crazy? We may not judge verbally, but it's going full steam in the mental realm. Some things humans just do. It's not personal. If overused, it can cause emotional harm to others. I think it makes a pretty good case because neither gossip nor judging are healthy practices. It's also good to be forgiving of both. There's no benefit to beating yourself up over not being perfect. The same is true for others. So back to the original author's point of view, he issues a healthy challenge to avoid using speech to tear others down. The suggestion is to use your speech for truth, love, and light. Use it to uplift other human beings. I do have one small disagreement as sometimes people need to hear harsh things to shake them out of an apathetic state of mind. The ego is not always responsive to sweetness. Gossip may seem fun and entertaining in the moment, but it can be very destructive to others. I suppose you could say it's simply not worth the momentary pleasure. Often, it damages the reputation of someone else, and the gossip may have been false. I have experienced this personally, even recently. Someone said things about me that were fabricated and exaggerated. The results were extremely damaging. Fortunately, my yoga practice has created a healthy form of detachment in me. I wasn't as bothered by this event as others may have been, but I would have still rather it never happened. I was able to pivot and disengage completely with the offender. Something Don Miguel leaves out of his book is how to deal with this situation. In my experience, the more distance you can put between yourself and the other, the drama will lose a lot of its traction. Essentially, that individual wants you to take the bait and continue to escalate something that wasn't ever that important to begin with. If you simply refuse to play the game, it can be successfully thwarted. You may have to make a concession or sacrifice. However, image credit. Copyright 1997 Miguel Angel Ruiz, MD. Image of Notepad. Copyright 2023 Daniel Adam Costello. Personally, I use the word in several ways. 1. I use it to promote others and increase their success. 2. I use it to encourage others to give me good service by using it kindly. 3. I use it to defend myself from attack by mitigating its intensity. Controlling emotions is very useful in the third scenario. 4. I use the word harshly on occasion. I avoid violence but will ramp up its intensity by speaking very clearly, directly, and honestly towards someone who is in a negative state of mind. Sometimes I myself am in a negative state of mind. That's just being human and it happens every once in a while. This can potentially be perceived as an attack, but that's often an individual's projection. It's not necessarily the truth. In the past, I used the word wrongly, and often. Let's be honest here. I know it was wrong, so I changed my tactics. Humans do wrong things, but if they change their actions, they are redeemable. If we are too harsh in this way, we are being very unloving as well as impractical. Once you develop awareness of something you do which is negative, it's your responsibility to correct it, or not. Humans will be humans after all too. Don't take anything personally. Taking things personally is a common human disease. Even if someone does something or says something personal, it's not personal. It's personal only to them, and their projection is all they have to communicate with. This is not generally how the victim of this kind of attention feels. So, the fault now lies with the person receiving because they are incorrectly perceiving the projection. They are taking it personally. Ironic? No. Now, I am not saying the person projecting is in the right or even off the hook. They are still guilty of projecting something negative. Sometimes the projection is positive, but it's not necessarily accurate. Ultimately, we are all responsible for our projections and our perceptions. How we perceive is everything. I made this argument of the importance of perception to my high school English teacher in front of the whole class. He was very irritated because it refuted his entire agenda for a particular assignment. I was characteristically my Sagittarius self and did exaggerate it a bit. My peers were amused but not the teacher. I have no regrets. The conclusion to this part of the commentary is simple. Don Miguel asserts that when you assimilate this teaching, you are freed from a great deal of unnecessary suffering. This is correct in my own experiences. I wouldn't claim that I have mastered this concept, but I have been working on it for a good 15 years or so. There does seem to be an enormous difference between not understanding this and understanding it even a little bit. It's worth putting the effort out in order to integrate it into your own life. 3. Don't make assumptions. Let me guess. You are already forming assumptions about me based on what you have read so far. No, it's okay. We all do this, but it's another thing worth contemplating. Despite the fact this book came into my life 15 years ago, I constantly make assumptions about others. The one difference is sometimes I catch myself and release it. In fact, I do that with almost every kind of negative thought, word, or action that comes to my mind. This is a part of yoga practice regarding training the mind and emotions. Moving forward, there is an effort to make decisions based on another's repeated behavior instead of making snap judgments. We are all just doing our best. After all, some of us are intentionally not doing our best, but that's okay too. It's possible that is the best that person can do. I am certain that making assumptions is something most human beings do incessantly. Why? I am not sure. Some things seem to be almost instinctual or automatic. Don Miguel Ruiz believes the reason people make assumptions is because they lack the knowledge of something or someone. So, the response is to dream or imagine a reality based on whatever thoughts come into the mind. This sounds silly when you think about it, but I do believe he is relatively correct. He may not be correct, but it's not worth arguing over. That's why I said I don't know, because I believe it is even more of a subconscious thing. We all do. Okay. How do we move past the state of making assumptions constantly? The author of the Four Agreements suggests finding the courage to ask questions. The more the better. I agree with this, as I have used it for a long time now. It's possible I ask too many questions. My rationale is that the more questions I ask, the less chance of a misunderstanding arising later. Misunderstandings often arise because of a lack of knowledge or clarity. Sometimes people just react emotionally, so it's not always the case. The way that I phrase it to others is, I value crystal clear communication, or something like that. If you explain why you are asking questions, it can help disarm the other person to some extent. When people are asked questions, there is a tendency for them to become defensive. This isn't useful to have a healthy dialogue. Through the process of asking questions, a lot of confusion is taken off the table. This isn't the end, however. The next phase, according to Don Miguel, is to express what you really want. I think this can be difficult for many people. It's not difficult for me, but I am not an ordinary nor extremely conditioned individual. The dream of conditioning has created most of what we are so busy discussing here. Our society determines this, so it's not possible to point the finger at one individual. We are all co-creators in this current reality. It's not just that many people lack the courage to ask for what they really want. Usually a process over time of getting rejected can create a sort of stubborn mental condition. It is possible the things we ask for are unreasonable, so that is certainly a factor. The last aspect that is immediately relevant is asking for what we want in an unskilled fashion. Even worse is if it's delivered in an aggressive or demanding way. That's almost a guarantee our desires will be rejected by others, which can contribute toward a semi-permanent mental outlook. That's rather unhealthy and ineffective. The collective situation this arrangement creates is rather interesting. At least, I find these things interesting. What is the situation? We train each other to never speak our true feelings or express our desires. Then it becomes socially unacceptable to speak the truth. This is a bizarre but easily understandable outcome. Society becomes a lonely place to be, and it doesn't have to be that way. We make it that way. If we can make that, we can make something else. I would encourage others to create a healthier reality for the collective. We are all in this together, and that's the truth. Fortunately, in my case, I was able to overcome this tendency over time. Quite radically. Really, I fearlessly express myself. Sometimes a bit too much. When you express yourself fully, it's not always received well. In fact, it's almost always not received well. That's okay. You can teach yourself to not take this personally, and you have the second agreement to back you up. When you stop requiring others to receive you in a highly specific way, it's quite freeing. Almost everything about the Four Agreements creates a more permanent state of freedom for the practitioner. It's important to stop being concerned whether others want to dwell in a conditioned state of mind. Teaching, sharing, and helping others out is fantastic. This is something I do professionally and on an individual level with others. This is not an easy path. Just to be clear, the way I can do this is by letting go of attachment to specific results. I am a doopy, so to speak, but I have no attachment to the outcome. If you are watching someone drink a glass of water and relieving a problem of dehydration, do you micromanage how they drink it? If you answered yes to this, that's a whole other book to read for. Always do your best for some reason. This is my favorite agreement. It wasn't when I first read it. I can't remember my exact reaction, but it was probably rejection. Why? Because I didn't practice it at all. It wasn't a part of my personal core philosophy. It is now. It's at the core of my core now. You can change the way you think if you want. All of the 4 agreements have the potential to set you free. This agreement is especially attuned to inner freedom. Paradoxically, or not, it's one of the most difficult agreements to fully surrender to. Big Ego never wants to surrender, but Big Ego isn't the boss of our souls. Our soul is the one in charge, and the soul is the closest thing to God we can possibly find within ourselves. There is more to that, but for the sake of staying on track, I won't elaborate. Image credit. Copyright 1997 Miguel Angel Ruiz, MD. Back to my own story. I was only able to accept this agreement after conquering resistance and laziness. Yes, those 2 things really got in the way. Doing your best is the opposite of being lazy. So right there, that's something to focus on. There must be a strong desire to move against the powerful force of inertia. Resistance is a complete obstacle. If you don't accept the agreement as being true, you'll never move past that point. What a drag. It's worth going through the headache to arrive at the other shore. I can say this with utter surety. There is a point I would like to mention. Don Miguel Ruiz explains that your best will change from moment to moment. It's not the same when you are sad, sick, stressed, happy, joyful, excited, or nervous. Moment to moment, we are constantly changing. It's important to factor this in so you avoid excessive self-judgment, self-abuse, or being overly critical of others. I couldn't agree more. Just so you know, I am a very critical person. It hits home even harder for me. My only hard and fast rule is to not beat myself up. On the other hand, it's healthy to constantly challenge yourself to do better. It's okay to be imperfect. It's very natural for humans. Sometimes I think we forget this. If you constantly practice doing your best and really relax into it, amazing things will happen. In my case, it manifests as a feeling of total contentment with my life. Unfortunately, this feeling isn't permanent, but it is where I live most of the time. I don't know many people who have mastered this, and much to their chagrin. Even when I hit rock bottom, or somewhere close, I can at least tell myself I did my best. If I didn't do my best, I only have myself to blame. This is a great foundation or focal point to keep a person from spiraling the drain. The conclusion of this commentary is rather straightforward. Aside from some light paraphrasing of Don Miguel Ruiz's book, the majority of what I wrote was based on my own experience, as well as understanding of the 4 agreements. Keep in mind I had 15 years to work on it. Even if this article was relatively short, it didn't come easily. Ultimately, I was so impressed with this book. I still am. I painted the 4 agreements in my closet on the wall. I wanted to see it every day. This branched out into painting aspects of yoga philosophy all over my home, which the current owner probably painted over. It's possible he learned something in the process. You never know. Every so often, I pick up the 4 agreements and reread it. I was in the process of doing that when the idea for this article came about. I find writing to be a tool for deeper learning. You're also sharing it with others usually, and this is what makes the world turn. I didn't finish rereading it because I wanted my commentary to be organic. I didn't want to simply regurgitate the same information. Of course, violating copyright or plagiarizing someone's work isn't at all my goal. Fair use copyright allows one to use others' works to some extent, but it's not an unlimited free-for-all. So, I read the insert of the book jacket, which I photographed and cited properly. That way, I was reminded of the gist of the teachings, without getting into the depth of Don Miguel's vocabulary. When you read something 15-30 times, opinions vary on this topic. You can really integrate it into your own subconscious. The subconscious mind feeds the conscious mind, and you don't want them to be out of sync. Memorization, application, integrations, contemplation, and discussion all lend themselves to being able to use something effectively. If you don't go about some sort of similar process, it's in one ear and out the other. You may think I go to extreme lengths with this sort of thing, but you will only understand the benefit if you do it. Any subject matter becomes totally crystallized through this process. It's quite remarkable. Read, write, reflect, integrate, and teach. Repeat as often as necessary or desired. So what are you waiting for? Get busy.